Writing Invisible Me and the Matriarchs with my Aunt Anna Myers provided great insight for me into my own personal connection to American colonialism. We discovered that we are related to three persons who bravely rode the Mayflower and landed on this continent on November 21st, 1620. The first Americans were our family members and are meaningful in American history. But I want to consider the word colonialism. This is a term coined by those moving to where others already lived to take it over. The Spaniards used a different word for those who moved forcibly onto this continent, conquistadores. In many ways, they are the same. Our ancestors first conquered and removed indigenous people on the East Coast. Then, the Trail of Tears was the forced removal of thousands of people who had lived here first for tens of thousands of years. Tens of thousands of years. Colonialism is personal. I go into the home of another human and tell them they can leave or be killed. They can go to my church, or I will kill their families. I will kill their sources of food and then die of starvation myself. The Trail of Tears is as personal as it gets. It started with the Indian Removal Act of 1830 and impacted many tribes, the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chippewa, Creek, and Seminole peoples, among others. Not only did we remove real people from their homelands, but we marched them and their families across hundreds of miles without food to inhospitable areas where we saw no personal opportunity, and we left them there to die. But that wasn't cruel enough. In 1879, the Carlisle Indian Industrial School was established to destroy their native tongues, their native languages, religions, and cultural practices. We stole 23,000 years of cultural enrichment that belonged to the children of this land. And without remorse, we buried them in unmarked graves to show they didn't matter to us. Colonialism is personal and it is cruel. When we wrote our book, I learned that my two times great-grandparents, Sarah Colby and Marshall Pearlie Wright, were born during the Mexican-American War of 1846 through 1848. This is significant because in case you know what the name 49ers came from, it was the California Gold Rush. California belonged to another country, Mexico. So did Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Nevada, and Lower Idaho. Mexico became independent of its colonizers and conquistadores, the Spaniards, on September 16, 1821. Let's talk about the history of California for a minute while under Spanish rule. The Spanish conquistadores traveled with soldiers and friars. The friars went along to establish rest stops or missions, where the soldiers could rest every 8 hours or so. How did they build their little churches? They threatened the indigenous people with death if they didn't convert. And their conversion was deemed a blank check on their lives. The friars and soldiers could make any demand they wanted of them if they were converted. They became slaves to the Spanish mission. If they attempted to escape, the soldiers would go find them and bring them back. The Mexican Inquisition was real. Convert or else, and conversion will deem you a Spanish slave or a Mexican slave. Thus, missions were built every 8 hours on horseback in places that might sound familiar. These are the old names: San Diego de Alcalá, San Juan de Capistrano, San Fernando, Rey de España, San Buenaventura, Santa Bárbara, Santa Cruz, San Jose, and San Francisco Solano. There were others, but these sounded familiar to me and closest to their current names. The people of Nueva España, or New Spain, struggled and integrated their stories. Mestizos, or mixed-race people, became the norm. Spaniards and indigenous people went on for generations until they heard that Napoleon Bonaparte had invaded Spain in 1808. The people rose up demanding independence and fought Spain from 1810 to 1821, when Mexican independence was achieved. All of New Spain was now Mexico. And then Americans, full of belief in manifest destiny, or that the United States was destined to expand coast to coast across the North American continent. This belief became a powerful colonial force in the early 1800s. Pride in the concept of America, religious fervor, and greed were the motivating factors. So what started the Mexican-American War? Well, the USA was sending immigrants in force to the Mexican territory of Texas, attempting to successfully take it over. The USA wanted to annex Texas. Mexico tried unsuccessfully to remove the illegal immigrants from America from their territory in Texas. I will tell you how our ancestors were directly involved in that in a future video. After the Alamo in 1836, the full Mexican-American War broke out in 1846. My 2 times great-grandparents were born soon thereafter, just after it started, and likely heard all about it growing up, about that event in American history. The USA won in 1848, and in 1849 the California Gold Rush occurred, and that's what that 49ers name came from. And in 1850, California declared U.S. statehood, though now it was smaller than it was under the Spanish and American rule. The Homestead Act was signed into law by Abraham Lincoln on May 20th, 1862, stating that adults could claim up to 160 acres of surveyed public land that belonged to other people if they lived on it, improved it, and paid a small registration fee. And the floodgates opened to the west of the continent to European Americans. The first transcontinental railroad across the USA was built between 1863 and 1869, and in the early 1900s, my 2 times great-grandparents, Sarah and Marshall Wright, traveled by train for 2 weeks to take up residence in the sleepy town of Hollywood with their 3 adult daughters, including my great-grandmother Josephine. It had 2 stores and a few schools and some exotic fruits and plants. And all the indigenous people who had inhabited the land for over 23,000 years disappeared into the land and became viewed as outsiders. For America now believed this land was their land, but it wasn't. It was stolen. To colonize a land, most commandments are broken. Most commandments are broken. Love your neighbor as yourself. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. How does that relate? Well, conquering friars, priests, and missionaries had ulterior motives for their so-called ministries. Conversion meant they would have slaves available to them. They used God's name in vain to achieve their greedy goals. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Rape was normalized when committed against all women, and especially those who were not European Americans, and especially against slaves or against the indigenous women. Thou shalt not steal. All of colonialism is stealing. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor, or basically don't lie. There are countless stories of colonizers, conquistadores, priests, and friars lying to the indigenous people in order to make gains and to cheat them. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. This is the American way. We normalized it. As one who grew up the child of evangelical missionaries, colonizing efforts continue as part of the culture. The use of Dante's Inferno to weaponize eternal damnation was helpful only to achieve their means without care for the method. It's time to reckon for our ancestors' choices. Our cultures can teach us things are normal that are wrong. They can teach us that cruelty is acceptable, that not all people are people, and that as long as we win, how we win doesn't matter. But it does. But it does. For all of you who are technically immigrants to this land, as I am, consider our story humbly, remorsefully, and wisely. Let us make choices that love our neighbors as ourselves. All of them. Let us keep our hearts open, even if they break. And let us hear those who have not been heard and advocate for those without a voice. Thank you, and I'll see you soon.